Baruch Hashem, you're a bad Jew.
Shalom.
Welcome back to another episode of Bad Jew, the place where there is no such thing as a bad Jew. With me today is none other than Marla Friedson. Marla, how are you today?
I'm good, Chaz. How are you?
Good. And by the way, this is a collaboration that I've been hoping for, I've been praying for way too long because, I mean, first of all, for those who don't know, Marla has an incredible podcast called Schmuckboys. Her and her co-star Libby talk about their dating lives and gossip. And lately I've been talking a lot about Israel. It's a really great show. Marla, how long have you been producing Schmuckboys now? Just out of curiosity.
I think 2 years. We released, I believe, no, 3. Wait, 20, no, almost 3 years. We started in, I think, December 2021. Our
That's
first episode
amazing.
came out. Yeah.
That's amazing. And the Jewish Journal has now adopted it as one of their own shows in the network, and it's doing really, really well. Everyone should go check out Schmuckboys. It's available on all your favorite podcast platforms. But Marla, we have a right of entry onto this podcast where you have to tell your life story in 4 minutes.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I think so.
All right. Let's see you do the 4-minute Bad Jew challenge. Achad, shtaim, shalosh, yalla.
Okay, so yeah, my name is Marla. I grew up in Connecticut, went to college in Massachusetts, then I moved to New York City, where I was living with my friends and working in the entertainment world. And I've kind of always been passionate about TV, film, and that kind of work. Oh my God, this is actually so much harder. Like what? And yeah, but then about almost 2 years ago, I decided to make the move to LA. I was craving change, wanted something different, also for my career. And kind of in the background of all this TV entertainment stuff, I've also always been doing some type of Jewish stuff in my life, whether it's Shabbat, going to Shabbat dinners or going to Israel or just getting involved in Jewish organizations. That's kind of always been in like the background of my life. You know, in college, I was a part of the Student Alliance for Israel. I was in a Jewish sorority. And then after college, you know, I kind of didn't really have anything going on in my life that was specifically Jewish for a little bit. And then I kind of had that realization of like, oh, I don't really have anything like Jewish going on. Like maybe I should like do stuff in New York. And my siblings, you know, introduced me to different organizations and I started going to Shabbat dinners and, you know, making more friends kind of in those more Jewish spaces. And it really kind of took off when I moved to Los Angeles because I didn't know anyone. And a really easy way to meet people and make friends was by going to Jewish organizations. And combining that with everything that's been going on in the world is really over the last year become almost like the forefront of my life. It's like everything that I do, work, outside of work, free time, it just always ends up being something Jewish related. And yeah, it's always just been a really big part of my life and my personality. I joke that if I wasn't Jewish, I don't know what my personality would be about. But I think, you know, a lot of Jews who grew up with the same stories about, you know, what our ancestors went through. And so, you know, for me, it's always about, you know, knowing what my ancestors went through and they couldn't be their proud selves openly, but I can be. So I'm going to be the most proud and the most open that I can possibly be. And that's probably one of like the biggest driving forces behind me being, you know, a quote unquote activist and using my voice. And yeah, it's been crazy. That's been so relevant. You know, I've always thought myself as being, you know, really, you know, into Judaism, but it's really just like stepped up, especially since October 7th of kind of being a big part of my life. And I don't know what else. Yeah. Schmuckboys is a really fun part of it as well. You know, Libby and I, we mostly wanted to be like a fun podcast, and it is, but at the same time, we kind of recognized this importance and platform that we had to try to help maybe teach people or help give people advice also related to what's going on and share the experiences of those that have, you know, been in the war or been fighting the anti-Semitism as well. So it's kind of a big thing for us since October 7th. And I don't know what else to say about my life. Wow, this is so much harder than...
For the record, you're killing it. You're doing great. You could leave it at there if you want to.
Well, no, does it not count as finishing the challenge if I don't talk for a full 4 minutes?
I mean, you got 15 seconds left. You're killing it.
Yeah. I love LA. I love New York.
Whoa, no way.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah.
Well, you nailed that 4-minute bad Jew challenge. And want to say that I'm really grateful to have you on the podcast. It's about damn time. I also want to say that when Marla first came to LA, I was on a retreat, and originally I had someone assigned in my car for this retreat. We're all going to carpool for this program up to the Big Bear area in California. And then what happened was there was a last minute change, and some random girl named Marla was assigned to my car, and I had to message the supervisor, and I was like, "Hey, I don't know who this Marla girl is. Is- I have to drive her? Like, yeah, you have to drive her. Is she cool? Yeah, she's cool. Turned out to be one of the coolest people. I've never seen someone assimilate and be a part of the social atmosphere of the Jewish community in such an impressive way as Marla continues to demonstrate it. She today gives me advice sometimes on how to assimilate into the Jewish culture out here. So it's pretty incredible, Marla. I also want to comment on this notion to step up, because you mentioned that during your 4-minute bad Jew challenge. October 7th was a wake-up call for all of us. And we can't stop talking about it, because for a lot of people, at the time that we're recording this, it's May 8th, 2024. For the Jews around the world, we're still in October 7th, 2023. We haven't had that privilege to be up to date with everyone else because we're still focused on that tragedy. We've all felt the need to step up, and Marla especially has been stepping up, and I want to commend her for that work. And I think her expertise can really shed light on a lot of different ways, both on an innovative perspective and also from a intellectual perspective, on how they can further embolden their activist efforts. And so, Marla, again, great to have you on the show. Let's get right into it. How do you do Jewish activism?
It's a loaded question. And I think there's not necessarily one right way to do Jewish activism. I think it can be done in different ways. One of the things that Emmanuel Shriki says when I've seen her speak a few times is, go follow your strengths. So for some people, their Jewish activism is, for example, Ben's Vegan Kitchen. He's Jewish chef, and he, connects to his audience through food. So he proudly shares Jewish food, Israeli food through his page. And that's, a form of activism by being like, I'm not going to stop showing, what I want to show. I'll just show, I'll also show Judaism and Israel, but not necessarily in a way that's about politics, but maybe it's more about cultural food. Or same with Adina Sussman, she shares a lot of food recipes. Other people might share maybe clothing brands from Israeli and Jewish companies. So I just want to mention before I kind of get into more political stuff that there are other forms and ways to kind of be an activist and help the Jewish community and be proud for the Jewish community without necessarily being political. If for some people that feels too difficult, you can find, other means, whatever your strength is,
And I just want to point out that that's really interesting, because when you think of activism right off the bat, automatically you jump to a political notion in your mind, like, oh, I really have to be up to date with what's happening in the Knesset. I have to really know what Netanyahu's actions were in the last 5 years and what might have led to now, But there's also the starting with what you know, and starting with what you know to your core will not just help the cause, but also strengthen your, be authentic to yourself, really. And I think that's really cool. It's like, okay, a way that I can be an Israeli activist is talking about the clothing brands that have had an impact on my life and the ones that I promote and the ones that I conduct my business through. That's a really great way of looking at it.
Yeah, because, like I said, it's not always about being political, but also, I mean, people a lot of times will say, oh, we make ourselves look like victims too much. And, you could debate that. But another way to get people to see who we are is not just about what we've been through as a victim, but also who we are as a people, our holidays, our culture, things that are important to us, things that humanize us. You know what I mean? So yeah, I just want to mention that first. But in terms of the more political activism, again, there's going to rallies. And I know some people kind of get a little bit scared by that. In my experience, most of the rallies I've been to, there's been no counter protesters. And I also think that it really helps to kind of revive your passion about what's going on, because you're just with all these other Jews and allies, singing, and it's sad, but it's also beautiful at the same time, because you're chanting together, you're singing together, and you know that every person that's literally surrounding you is feeling the same exact way as you are. And I know some people maybe are hesitant to go out to those rallies, but I think it's important. I think it's even more important that if you have non-Jewish friends, see if they'll come with you to the rallies, so you can also help them to see, what we're all about. Like, if they want to really learn what we're standing for, then come to a rally and see what we're saying, see the words that we use to describe the conflict, see the words, see the way that we have empathy for both sides, And then the main thing, probably the biggest thing that people have been talking about since October 7th and even prior would be, like social media activism. And for me, I probably started being more quote unquote activisty on social media probably 4 or 5 years ago, I want to say. And with the biggest kind of impact or biggest kind of jump in that activist world being in May of 2021, when, there was Hamas started another war because they broke another ceasefire. And, it wasn't, as bad as what happened on October 7th, but it was bad. And so it's crazy because over the past, 7 months, I've seen some of the things that I posted on my story back in May of 2021. And it's quite literally some of the same things word for word. The same things we were trying to get people to understand about anti-Semitism in May 2021 is the same exact things we've been saying since October 7th. And it's crazy because October 7th was so much worse, and yet it's still just not getting through to people. And I think if people are trying to, be an activist and they want to use their voice, but they don't know how, I mean, to start with, it's finding pages that you connect with, whether you're liberal, whether you're conservative, whether you're moderate, you can find Jewish activist pages that maybe fit what you kind of connect with the most. And, you could always just start by like resharing things that you feel confident in. And then I think kind of the next level after that is adding your own commentary. I've gotten a lot of comments from people that they like that I add my own commentary to the things that I post, because it also gets people to see my voice and like how I'm going to add to what I'm sharing on top of that. And then kind of if you're going the next step after that, it would be, not just resharing other people's stuff, but just writing your own thing and putting it on your story or putting it on a post. And then the next level I would say is videos. And I think, there's a lot of times I want to make videos on things, but I just don't have the time. But my thinking is that I think it helps to connect people more because they see my face, they hear what I'm saying. And my hope is that people will really take the time to listen to it. I think people are more likely to listen to something than to read something. People are just so quick on their phones nowadays. And my hope is that they'll connect with it more when they see that it's, especially if they know me, I think they know that I try to be a good person. And so if they're seeing me say something, and I would hope that I would have more of an impact, because there's so many different things that kind of go into, using your social media for activism. And there's a lot of different things that I think are important, one being like, unfortunately, there's a lot of things that are put on the internet that end up being, not true. I will say, in my opinion, it's more so the other side that puts out fake things, but there also, unfortunately, are sometimes pages that have big followings on our side. I don't really even like to use our side, but, our side that put out things that end up being not necessarily fake, but it's like, no, this is actually from a different time. And no, this is not actually what happened. And I feel like prior to October 7th, I feel like our side was really good at not putting out things that, were misconstrued. I think, unfortunately, since October 7th, there's been people are more quick to post because obviously just want to get the word out there, which I understand. But, we really have to be vigilant and be careful about not sharing things that are fake, because it only makes us look worse. It doesn't matter how many times the other side shares things that are fake. When we share something that is fake, it's going to be, way more in the news, similar to how with these, campus encampments, right? There's been plenty of times where like these, I don't like to call them pro-Palestinians, like to call them anti-Semites. These anti-Semites have been violent many, many times. And it's like a blip in the news. And then, of course, the one time we fought back and got aggressive at UCLA, headlines everywhere.
Yeah.
We're all headlines about all the times we've gotten attacked, right? And so it sucks, but just like Israel is held to a higher standard and scrutinized more than every other country on earth, we as a Jewish people are also held to a higher standard and scrutinized more than any other minority, I think, on earth.
Agreed. Just to say something that I don't think I've heard any side ever admit to, is that neither side's activism is perfect by any stretch of the imagination.
Mhm.
And I'll be the first to say it. the one thing that really grinded my gears recently, that really lost the Jews' credibility, was, and I'm again, you said you don't want to make it us versus them. Unfortunately, they've made it an us versus them situation. I don't want it to be that way. No one wants it to be that way. We can all be on the same side. You can be a Zionist and be pro-Palestinian, but it's harder and harder to say those things when you have a side that's almost entirely, seemingly entirely wanting to kill you and wipe away your existence. So it makes me not want to be pro-Palestinian, right? So what I will say, though, is that I like a situation where a Jewish outlet lost credibility in my eyes was there was a clip of Robert De Niro yelling at someone on the street. And the clip, out of context, you see Robert De Niro saying, "Go back home. This is real life." Something to that effect, right? Turns out that all these news outlets thought that he was yelling, or they jumped on the idea that he was yelling at pro-Palestinians or the pro-Hamas supporters who were coming in to support it sounded like he was out of context. It could be thought that he was yelling at protesters, right? The reality is that was just behind the scenes, caught on camera, super zoomed in. And if you look closer at the video, you'll see there's other co-stars right behind him, and it's very clearly a movie scene he's acting out that has nothing to do with the conflict. But out of context, it could be construed as him yelling at protesters, and that's not at all what was happening. So everyone's jumping in on these moments to just report as quickly as possible without worrying about credibility. I would say that there are better places to get your information from outside of mainstream outlets. There are different people and reporters that have taken to social media that have been able to report on statistics. Shouting out to my friend Izzy Salant, our friend Izzy Salant, who works for a Jewish news syndicate. They have anchors who are on the ground there in Israel, able to report on what is happening and be able to give straightforward statistics and credibility that I think for the most part does a great job at emphasizing what is happening over there. The bottom line is, I think a great indicator for a credible source versus a non-credible source is who is speaking in absolutes and who is actually showing statistics and numbers. Because the numbers don't lie at the end of the day.
My dad always says figures don't lie, but liars can figure.
I like it, though. I like it.
He's said this to me so many times that I should.
Your dad's gonna watch this and be very upset with you. Yeah.
I think it's numbers don't lie, but liars can figure, or something. Figures don't lie, but liars can figure. I think that's what it is. But and that's another thing too. Like I posted this to my story recently after seeing someone that I'm friendly with post something that was just absurdly not true. Like there's if someone is posting something with zero source, zero link, zero tagging of any type of news thing, you should not be resharing things. That's just I could type out literally anything and post it to onto my feed, but that doesn't make it true. And that's something I especially have seen. I've come across pages with that thousands of followers, and that's exactly what they're doing from the other side of just saying things. I'm like, there's literally there's no source, there's no link. They're just posting this, and people are buying it, and it's crazy. And thankfully, like I said, I don't think it's as bad on our side, but it has happened. And so also when it comes to resharing things, just I've learned over the years from different pages that I followed which pages I can trust more than others. And I still will occasionally share from the pages that I've seen share fake stuff sometimes, but only if I've been able to verify from other things that, it's accurate. Because the last thing you want to do is get caught in a lie, because again, we get scrutinized more than the other side. And so it's important to, pay attention to what you're sharing. And you know what? The other thing is, and I said this before, if you don't know how to get political, you feel like, I don't know about the government, I don't know about the elections, I don't know the history of the conflict, you can focus on things that should not be controversial. And if people try to make it controversial, that just shows you they're not a good person. There should be absolutely nothing controversial about talking about the hostages. Absolutely. And anyone that tries to justify that automatically, you shouldn't even have them in your life, shouldn't be friends with them. If you feel like there's a conversation that they're maybe open to having, you can try. But I think one of the things I've also realized as an activist over the years, in order to not, drive myself crazy, in order to have mental stability, is picking my battles. I think I used to, especially on Twitter and on Instagram, right? I would respond to like any ridiculous comment that I saw and waste time in my own day responding to someone. And then you maybe click on their page and it's like their profile is like a duck and they have 300 followers. And I'm like, you know what? This is not really worth my time. But if I see that it's someone that's verified, has a lot of followers, I'm going to say something. And my thought process behind that is other people that are maybe not commenting, but seeing the comments, if they see someone verified saying something versus a stranger, they're probably more likely to believe the verified comment. And if there's not a single person combating what that verified comment says, they'll probably take it at face value. But if I can be someone to put another idea out there on whatever this post is, my hope is that someone that's, not crazy one side or the other, but someone that's, is open to learning, wants to understand, if they see that there's something else being said besides that one other comment, it at least will hopefully make them think, okay, this isn't necessarily true because someone else is saying something different. And so I think a lot of times it's also about picking your battles. I will admit there have been sometimes recently where I get into it in the comments with someone that's literally not worth my energy. But sometimes, it just happens. One thing I'm done with, especially with only profiles that seem very not fake or profiles that, clearly don't, I would say, have any influence, which I hate saying that because I don't want to make it seem like people don't matter if they don't have a following, because I don't think that at all. But in terms of like the activism game, sometimes what I'll do is like, there's obviously a lot of bots on the internet. So once in a while, I'll just respond to something, someone either in my DMs or in a comment, and be like, oh, like you must be a bot account, just to like kind of annoy them. Like instead of arguing with them, I'll just dismiss them and be like, oh,
just
like
yeah, twist the knife a little bit.
Yeah. And then
yeah.
I'm like mad and they can't even argue because they just get like, they're like, I'm not a bot. I'm like, another one of these bots.
Right. Well, one thing I was really proud of recently, and speaking of the comments section, there's a Instagram account called Feminist, and it's about the feminist movement. But as we know, these movements that have been feminist or have been pro whatever, right, have not been in support of Israel. So there's this very clear double standard that's been cast against Jews. Rape is bad. We can all agree on that. That's not a controversial idea. Rape is bad unless it's against Jews on October 7th.
Yeah.
And then Feminist, by the way, has not made a single post about what Hamas did.
Yep.
And then they've made a post recently. They made a reel that was a collaboration with a few other influencers. Got 22.9 thousand likes and 517 comments. And this video is about a girl who talks about her activism inside the encampment. She's very clearly pro Hamas inside the encampment. She's doing her thing. So she's talking about how great it is and how peaceful and how beautiful of an experience is. There's all these beautiful cultures. Everyone's very aware of their food allergies. They have a nice book exchange. It's very sanitary. She talks about reading this poem by a Palestinian in there. And so she's talking about how beautiful the UCLA encampment is. So I went ahead and left a comment. And my comment, and you'll have to forgive some of my grammar, by the way. One thing as well I want to point out is that I can't comment on this from Bad Jew because Bad Jew doesn't follow them, and they have a restriction against non-followers. So they themselves, by the way, can't even handle criticism from outside accounts.
There's so many accounts that will delete comments that are criticizing. And it's like, if you have to do that, it shows you that you don't really even believe what you're saying because you don't want to deal with combating. Yeah.
So I wrote this in bad grammar because I first of all suck at typing with my very clumsy thumbs on this small little screen here. But I said, so you're not going to show the mass mob calling for intifada. You're not going to show the blockades where you physically intimidate students and staff who are trying to attend class. You're not going to provide the full story. That got so many likes and comments, and that started a whole entire conversation. So just starting the conversation, you have the choice not to engage further, but just starting the conversation to help widen the perspective is so essential. I think it's really important because ideas are more impactful than bullets at the end of the day. And this really, from where we're standing and what we can do and what we can actually control, all we can do is control what ideas we decide to put out there.
Yeah, 100%.
One thing I also want to talk about as well, there's a lot of different narratives out there, but ultimately one of the major narratives that kind of covers an umbrella of a lot of the hateful rhetoric that has been thrown in our direction is the idea that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism.
Mhm.
And, quite frankly, to their point, they
Mhm.
do have Jews, or at least people who claim that are Jews,
Mhm.
in their encampments that are in these protests
Right.
involved.
Right.
What proof can a Zionist Jew use to prove that anti-Zionism is indeed anti-Semitism?
Oh my gosh. There's a lot of proof. I mean, for starters, I will say about the encampments, it's just hilarious the way they tokenize maybe 2 Jews that like, what have we been taught for years in like the social justice space? Don't tokenize, right? Like if people would be, putting Candace Owens everywhere, they'd be like, oh, you're tokenizing her. And you're like, yeah, it's because you wouldn't use like the one extreme voice and say that represents everyone because that's ridiculous. And we know that they're like, it's just so funny how the Jews that have never once been, into their Judaism now come out of the woodwork just so they can use it against their own people, and it's disgusting. But I mean, it's just so obvious. I mean, there's so many things that are happening that are just clearly attacks on Jews that have nothing to do with Israeli government. You know what I mean? And you're gonna say that, Jews getting, tracked down and run down in Athens, Greece yesterday is just criticism of the Israeli government. I'm in a group chat and someone shared how a week after October 7th, they were in Greece and an Israeli guy, and someone broke into like his home and robbed him, stabbed him, attacked him, like all this crazy stuff. And this was not like a random attack. This was like an anti-Semitic attack. Explicitly not letting Jewish students get to class. There's very clear videos of them letting other students walk through the encampment or walk through these random barricades they've made, but no, not the Jewish students. I mean, God, there's endless. It's like my brain can't even like think of which one to focus on because there's so many examples of quote unquote this anti-Zionism. But even if you think about the word as itself, like the word and if you're going with the idea that Zionism is the belief that like Israel exists and should exist and the Jews have the right to live in their indigenous homeland, which is what Zionism is across the board to everyone, then being anti the existence of the only Jewish country is of course anti-Semitic. Because you're saying the only country on earth that can exist is the Jewish one, despite the fact that there are many, many countries on this planet, Muslim countries, Christian countries, that also like oppress their people. But like no one's talking about that. They're only talking about the Jewish state. So you can criticize the Israeli government all you want. And literally, Israelis are doing that. I was in Israel in March, and there was a huge protest against the government, and they're holding signs in Israel that say Palestinian lives matter. So and yet you have people in America saying that those Israelis that are saying Palestinian lives matter don't have the right to live there. Like it's just crazy. It's just insane and it's this idea that like anti-Semitism shape shifts. And you'll hear a lot of other activists talk about this too. Like whatever is the current, thing in society that's bad, like they somehow tie that to the Jews. If people hate capitalism at this time period, the Jews are capitalists. If they hate communists, the Jews are communists. Like anti-Semitism just shapeshifts. And we know nowadays what's the thing that's seen as bad is white, is colonizing. So what do? You say that all the Jews and Israel are white and colonizers, despite the fact that that's literally just not true. And that majority of Jews in Israel are actually literally from the Middle East. So yeah, it's just an absurd thing for them to it's just a way for them to gaslight us by saying, "Oh, I'm not being anti-Semitic. I'm just anti-Zionist." When I went to the rally at UCLA, I engaged with some of the people on the other side, tried to have conversations with them. And I made a comment saying, trying to explain to this kid that Intifada is basically calling to like, kill Jews or something. And he was like, no, 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 it's just like Zionists. And I was like, well, all Jews are Zionists. So 90%, 95% of Jews are Zionists. So when you're saying you want to kill all Zionists or stop all Zionists, you're essentially saying all Jews. You're just
Right.
trying to find a nicer way to say it so that it's not as obvious. But like everyone knows what you're saying. And there's been plenty of examples where people accidentally say the quiet part out loud. Like I posted that clip last night of some girl who literally said, it feels like Muslim and Arabs and anti-Jewish students aren't getting supported. Literally, she said anti-Jewish, not anti-Zionist, anti-Jewish. And it's like, oh, So now you're not even like before you're trying to hide behind this whole anti-Zionist idea, and now you're just straight up saying it. And we always knew it was that. We were never confused. It's other people that like are trying to make excuses for them. But just clear as day, if you're only against the one Jewish country existing, that's anti-Semitic. There's no way around that.
Something I want to emphasize, I think you said that so beautifully. I didn't want to interrupt you at all when you were saying that. So well done. I think you hit some points really strongly. I want to emphasize as well that there is nothing wrong with criticizing the Knesset. There is nothing wrong with criticizing government.
Yeah.
That would be like me saying, I don't like the current administration, thus I am anti-American.
Yeah.
That is not what that means.
Yeah.
So I am not an anti-Israeli.
Yeah.
I'm not an anti-Zionist. I have my criticisms against the Knesset. Right?
Yeah.
All Jews should have, and all Zionists should have criticism of the government. Okay?
Yeah.
That's not a nationalist behavior. We're accused of being nationalists, by the way.
Right.
So on top of that, if we're going to break down the definitions for a second, Zionism is a belief, as you said, Jews should live in their ancestral homeland.
Yeah. And I don't want to interrupt you, but something I was thinking of, and like some people will try to say, oh, well, there's different definitions to Zionism, blah, blah. And I would say, no, there's not different definitions of Zionism. I think all Jews have the same exact definition, but how you maybe want to go about putting that into action is different. Maybe, right? Like, right, there obviously are some Jews who are Zionists, and their belief as a Zionist is no Palestinian state, strictly a Jewish state in that land. But you also have more liberal Zionist Jews, which their way of saying Zionism is two-state solution. And so, but the idea of what Zionism is for both the conservative and the liberal Jew is the same exact definition. It just may be how you want to go about putting that into action is different. But the definition is the same. Because a lot of people, when you try to say, when they say, Zionism is this, and this, I'm like, no, Zionism is XYZ. And they'll say, well, someone else said it was this. I'm like, doesn't matter what someone else said. Like this, it's our term, and we get to describe and define our terms. I would never try to tell a Native American, oh, your term actually means this. Because that would be absurd. It's not my term to define. It's their term to define. Right. And if people want to, argue or debate, how Zionism should be put into action, sure, you can have that debate. But you can't debate what the actual definition is, because that's only ours to define.
I literally made this post, a very similar post yesterday, as the chief marketing officer of Shalea put on social media, anti-Semites don't get to redefine Zionism. And I talked about the whole origins, the history of Zionism, where it comes from in that post on _Los Angeles. It's a great account. I'm a little biased, but that's just me.
I agree. It's a great account.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it. I want to again, go back to the point where if that is the definition, which is how we've defined it, and you're saying you're an anti-Zionist, that means that you're invalidating our right to live in our land that we're indigenous to. And if you're going to say, Israel is one of the few case studies in the entire world where an indigenous people reclaim their land. This is what it looks like. And you have been calling for that in your leftist agenda for so long. So you'd think that you'd rally behind us for being able to reclaim our identity and our nationality. Right. But this double standard of Jews is what's preventing you from feeling from being in the program. Also, I want to point out as well something Kosha Dills, the Jewish rapper, said at the beginning of October 7th. I liked what he said a lot. He said, you like the bagel and schmear Jew. You like the comedic Jew. You like the neurotic, funny Jew with the glasses. You like the scientific Jew, but you don't like the Israel-loving Jew. And so there's this whole double standard around this where it's like, you clearly don't understand what a Jew is, because you don't understand that we actually are innately tied to that land. If you take Israel out of the Jewish equation, there is no Judaism.
Right. Our holidays would make zeros. Like everything in Judaism, every holiday, the way we pray, everything is tied to Israel, and it's been like that for thousands of years. We didn't just wake up one day and say, hey, I think when we pray, we should face this way. And one of the other big things that was I think one of my rabbis said it to me, is like, think about the holiday of Sukkot, right? The holiday of Sukkot is about the harvest. Now, you could be in like Norway and it's snowing out and there's literally a snowstorm. But why are you celebrating the harvest and Sukkot? Because in Israel, that's the time of year that it happens, no matter where you are in the world. Like every holiday is tied to Israel because that's where we're from.
I would like to see a statistic at some point of the percentage of prayers that Jews have that are tied to Israel. Not the personal prayers, not the ones that you create, but the ones that are listed, the ones that we have out there. I would bet my entire savings account that over 90% of the prayers that we have listed in our Torah, that come from our Torah, that are derivatives from different texts that we've put together, that sages have combined for us to be able to continue to praise and get closer to Hashem. I would bet you my entire savings account that 90% of them acknowledge Israel. I can only think of one right now that does. Well, actually, I don't even know the one about the bathroom, using the bathroom for a second. I don't even know if that one acknowledges Judaism, but I think the rest of them do. Is the thing is that like I can't, I just want to know. So the bottom line is, I'll leave that in for comedic value, for comedic, whatever, comic relief. I'll leave that in. So the bottom line is, we're inherently tied to the land. To say that Israel cannot be a part of the Jewish identity is the equivalent of you saying a Native American does not belong in this land. Simple as that.
Yeah.
So Marla, thank you for being on the podcast. For those who want to connect with you, follow you, pick your brain about activism, what is the best way for them to stay in touch with you?
Yeah, I'd say you can follow me on Instagram, MarsBars36. You can message me. I try to help people when I can if they have questions about activism, or if they, are having a conversation with someone, they don't know how to respond. I don't want to say I'm a ghostwriter, but I try to help my friends sometimes about in certain conversations where they don't know, how to go forward. And the biggest thing I would say is educate yourself. If you educate yourself, that's all the tools that you need. You'll be able to have the conversations on your own. You'll be able to combat all the anti-Semitism if you're educated. And I think that's the biggest thing is you need to educate yourself on the history. And it's not necessarily a fun history. It's the Middle Eastern politics and Middle Eastern history. It's it maybe not be as fun as pop culture to some people, but that's going to be the biggest thing. And if I can give a quick shout out to this other nonprofit that I work for called Jews Talk Justice, we have an online platform where there are a lot of educational resources that I think and hope will help people to have the tools they need to continue, to standing up for our people.
Well done, Marla. It's really been a treat to have you on the podcast. And again, thanks for giving us your advice. And to the listeners of Bad Jew, please give us a follow, give us a like, leave a comment on social media. Please leave a review on our podcast platforms. Also, please support our shop at badjew.co. That is badjew.co, where you can buy merchandise, including my favorite item, which is the Mazel Tov muscle shirt. I love to wear that every day at the gym. So again, thank you for being on the podcast, and we'll see you next Wednesday.
Shalom.